The room smelled of polished wood, expensive wine, and danger. Under the golden chandelier, the entire table froze the moment she spoke. "Sì, lo farò," she whispered in Italian, unaware of the weight those words carried. A hush fell across the grand dining hall of Palazzo Nero. 8 men in black suits exchanged sharp glances, but only one pair of eyes held her. His. Dario Viscardi. The name alone made men lower their heads. His jaw tightened as his thumb slowly traced the edge of his glass. She ended the call, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear, yet, but from the thickness in the air pressing against her chest. Her Italian was smooth, native, beautiful. Too beautiful for someone who'd claimed to be a translator from Marseille. He leaned back in his chair, dark eyes burning through her like smoke seeping into silk. "Who were you talking to?" His voice was low, calm, and terrifying. She opened her mouth, but the words stuck to her tongue like glue. No one ever lied to Dario and walked away untouched, and she just spoke in the language his enemies bled in.
The guards moved first, not him. A subtle signal, barely a twitch of Dario's fingers, was all it took for 2 men to step forward. She flinched as their polished shoes echoed against the marble floor. The world around her blurred, the clink of crystal glasses, the heavy scent of tobacco, the silence thick as oil. Her name was Ilara Voss, or at least that's what she'd told them when she was hired 3 weeks ago. She was supposed to be invisible, a silent assistant at the edges of his empire, translating contracts, bringing coffee, disappearing behind glass doors. She never planned for her accent to betray her. "Take her to the East Wing," Dario said finally, voice slicing through the air like a blade. No shouting, no threats, just quiet power. Ilara's stomach twisted. She knew enough about the East Wing to know people didn't come back from it unless they'd proven something extraordinary or confessed. And she had no confession to give, because what she'd said on that phone wasn't meant to be heard by him. They dragged her through a narrow corridor where the light dimmed to a sickly gold. Her heels clicked against stone, heartbeat racing faster than her steps. She tried to steady her breath, but panic climbed up her throat. "I didn't do anything," she whispered, more to herself than to the men gripping her arms. They said nothing. Dario didn't keep men who liked to talk. A cold gust swept down the hall as they stopped before an iron door. The guard on the left keyed a code into the panel. A soft beep. The lock unlatched with a sound like a closing coffin. When they shoved her inside, she stumbled forward, hands catching the edge of a mahogany table. The room smelled different, colder, cleaner. No sunlight reached here, only the hum of a single light above. And then the sound of approaching footsteps, heavy, measured, controlled. Dario didn't run. He never rushed. He always arrived like time itself, unavoidable. When the door opened again, the guards straightened. He entered in a dark, tailored suit, every movement soaked in authority. He didn't have to ask for silence. Silence belonged to him.
"Don't let her leave," he said softly, turning his back as the guards closed in. The finality in his tone felt like a verdict carved into stone. Ilara's chest tightened, breath shallow. The iron door shut with a heavy thud, sealing her inside a world she couldn't escape. The sound echoed like a heartbeat she didn't own anymore. She didn't know whether to cry, scream, or run, but none of those options existed now. Outside the walls of Palazzo Nero, a storm rolled across the coastline, wind slamming against the old stones like fists. She could taste salt on her lips, like the sea itself was mocking her. She replayed the call in her head, every word, every syllable. If she had stayed silent, if she had waited 2 seconds more, maybe she wouldn't be trapped now. But fate doesn't bargain, and somewhere behind Dario's cold expression she could sense it. He wasn't just curious, He knew something. Something about her past she thought was buried. Something she could no longer run from.
3 weeks earlier, Ilara stood in front of the iron gates of Palazzo Nero, clutching the strap of her worn leather bag. Rain fell in slow sheets, soaking the cobblestone driveway. She'd rehearsed this moment 100 times, repeating the fake story she built like armor. My name is Ilara Vos. I was born in Marseille. I translate and serve. Nothing more, nothing less. But behind the lie was the truth. She hadn't been born in Marseille. She hadn't belonged anywhere for a very long time. When the gates opened with a groan, 2 armed men scanned her ID and let her through. She didn't know then that this place wasn't a house, it was a fortress. And inside lived a man who owned silence like it was currency. Her heels echoed as she followed a butler into the grand foyer. Velvet curtains, marble floors, chandeliers burning like captured suns. She felt out of place in her thin black dress, her hair pulled back in a plain bun. She had planned to be unseen, unimportant. That was the only way to survive here.
Dario entered slowly, every movement deliberate, like someone who didn't need speed to control the air. His suit was black as the night outside, collar undone just enough to show he hadn't slept. He glanced at the photos scattered on the table, then at her. "You've lied to me," he said. No rage, no surprise, just certainty. She forced herself to look up, her throat burning. "I lied to everyone," she whispered. It wasn't defiance, it was survival leaking out. He picked up one of the photos, a younger Chiara, smiling in front of a crumbling church in Sicily. Chiara Moretti, daughter of Lorenzo Moretti, fiancé of Matteo Alvini. His voice grew quieter with every word, sharper. A name that vanished after a massacre no one talks about anymore? Her knees almost gave out. He knew. He knew everything. "Why are you here, Chiara?" Her real name sounded heavier in his mouth than she remembered, like a chain, like home. And she realized he wasn't asking because he didn't know. He was asking to see if she'd break.
The thunder cracked above the palazzo as Dario poured himself a drink from the bar in the corner. "Matteo Alvini," he said calmly, swirling the glass. "Your fiancé. He wasn't just anyone. He was my enemy's blood. When your family disappeared, I assumed you were gone too. I was wrong." She clenched her fists. The name Matteo burned like old fire in her chest. She had loved him once, before the betrayal, before the night of screams and smoke. "I wasn't part of their war," she said softly. "I was just someone who got caught in it." Dario turned, the amber liquid glowing between his fingers. "No one is just someone in this world," he said. "Everyone belongs to someone's story." He took a step closer. "And now you've walked into mine." She trembled, not because he shouted, but because he didn't have to. His voice carried centuries of wars she never wanted to touch again. But now she was inside it, and there was no door left to run through.
He placed the glass down and leaned against the table, his eyes fixed on her like a shadow that refused to move. "You had every reason to run," he admitted, "but now I have every reason not to let you." She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. He wasn't threatening her life. He was claiming something else, something worse. "I can hand you over," he said softly, "or I can keep you here where no one touches you. Not my enemies, not the ghosts of your past." He tilted his head slightly. "Tell me, Chiara, which one should I choose?" Her pulse thundered in her ears. Her past had finally caught up,
not with bullets, but with a man whose voice was more dangerous than any gun. She thought he'd kill her. Instead, he wanted to keep her, and somehow that terrified her more. Outside, the storm cracked open the night sky, and inside, Dario's last words hung heavy between them. Don't let her leave. It wasn't a threat anymore. It was a promise.
"I'm not your prisoner," she said. The words came out sharp, though her hands trembled in her lap. He walked closer, each step quiet but deliberate, like a wolf approaching a wounded deer. "Technically," he said softly, "you are." Her heart twisted. "But unlike my enemies, I don't keep people in chains. I keep them where I can see them." He stopped a breath away, his presence swallowing the space between them. "Why?" she whispered. "Why me?" Dario tilted his head, studying her like he was reading a language no one else understood. "Because you shouldn't exist," he answered. "Because your name was buried. Because someone is lying out there, pretending you're still dead. And now your voice is going to make someone very nervous." His voice dropped lower. "And I like making people nervous." Her stomach sank. She wasn't just a girl who'd been found. She was a weapon now, one he intended to use.
Chiara stood, trying to keep her breathing steady. "I won't help you," she said. His eyes didn't flicker. "Then you'll stay," he replied simply. No shouting, no anger, just a wall. She felt like she was screaming against stone. "You can't just decide that," she snapped. "Watch me," he murmured. The softness in his voice was scarier than any threat. He reached past her, opening the door behind. 2 men were already waiting outside. She hadn't even heard them approach. "This is the thing about my world," Dario said, almost gently. "Freedom isn't taken, it's given. And right now, Chiara Moretti, your freedom is mine." The door closed again. She felt trapped in the quiet storm he carried with him. He didn't chain her hands. He chained her with choice, or rather, the lack of it. And that was worse, much worse. Hours passed. Chiara paced the room like a wild thing in a cage. Her mind raced through escape plans, each one crumbling before it even began. Cameras, guards, locked gates. This wasn't a house, it was a kingdom. And Dario was a king who didn't share his crown. As night fell, she found a note slipped under the door. No name, no handwriting, just 4 words. "He's coming for you." Her blood ran cold. Only one person would phrase it like that, someone from the life she left behind. Matteo Alvini wasn't dead, or someone wearing his name wasn't. Her heartbeat thundered against the walls. If Matteo was alive, he'd want her back. Not because of love, because of what she knew. The past she buried was clawing its way out of the ground, and Dario, he would never let her walk into another man's arms, not alive at least. When Dario returned at midnight, the room smelled faintly of rain and steel. "Who's coming?" he asked. No preamble, no soft landing. He already knew about the note. She held it tightly, fingers trembling. "You're watching me," she whispered. He didn't deny it. "I watch everything I own," he replied. She stiffened. Own. The word cut through her like a blade. "I'm not yours," she said. He leaned closer, voice low, steady, terrifyingly honest. "Then run," he said. "But understand this. When they find you, I won't be the one holding a gun to your head. He will." His hand brushed the door handle, but he didn't leave. "And that's why you're staying here. Because I'm the devil you can see. He's the one hiding in the dark." The door shut softly behind him. Chiara sank to the floor, her breath shaking. She hated him. She feared him. But most of all, she knew he was right. The next morning, Palazzo Nero awoke in shadows, not because the sun wasn't shining, but because Dario's men were moving differently, faster, quieter, armed. Something was happening. From the second-floor window, Chiara watched a fleet of black cars snake their way up the gravel road like dark veins. Her stomach twisted. She knew that pattern, that arrogance. Matteo Alvini's people didn't knock. They arrived like storms. The door to her room opened, and a guard stepped in. "Boss wants you downstairs." No explanation, no room to argue. She followed the guard through corridors that smelled faintly of leather and gunpowder. Downstairs, the foyer was filled with men in black suits. Dario stood in the center, hands in his pockets, expression carved from marble. He didn't look surprised. He looked ready. "They're here," one of his men whispered. Chiara froze at the sound of a voice carried through the air, a voice she once loved. Matteo. He was alive, and worse, he was smiling. "Well," Matteo said, voice soft, almost affectionate. "You've been hiding well, my little dove." Her skin crawled. "I wasn't hiding," she whispered. "I was surviving." His smile didn't falter. "Surviving away from me." Dario's jaw tightened, though his face remained unreadable. "She's not yours," Dario said. Matteo's gaze flicked to him, and something dangerous danced between the two men, a silent war older than this moment. "Everything that was mine," Matteo said slowly, "comes back to me." Chiara's heart pounded. She wasn't a thing, she wasn't a prize, but the way they stood, two wolves circling a wounded deer, made her realize she was being claimed like territory. "I didn't come to ask," Matteo added, taking a step forward. Dario's men raised their weapons. Matteo didn't flinch. "I came to collect." "Illara vas," Dario said, rolling her name slowly, as if testing if it was real. She pressed her back against the wall, her pulse hammering against her ribs. "You've been working in my house for 21 days. In those 21 days, you've made yourself quiet, obedient, forgettable." His steps circled her, like a predator assessing a trapped deer. "But tonight, you forgot yourself." He stopped inches away, close enough for her to smell the faint trace of leather and cologne. She forced herself to meet his eyes. They weren't warm. They were obsidian, cold, polished, deadly. "Who was on the phone?" He didn't raise his voice. Each word landed like a heartbeat. She swallowed, lips parting. If she told the truth, she'd drag someone else into the fire. If she lied, he'd burn her alive himself. Her silence was louder than any scream, and Dario smiled. Not a kind smile, a smile that meant he'd already decided something.
Her job was simple, or it was supposed to be. She translated contracts, filed documents, brought coffee and tea to men who didn't make eye contact. She memorized faces, but never names. She learned to walk softly, speak less, and never look directly at Dario during meetings. Every corner of Palazzo Nero had rules, unspoken, but enforced like iron. Some women whispered about him in the kitchen, about the power, the rumors, the cruelty, but Illara kept her head down because she wasn't there for power or gossip. She was there to disappear. But every time Dario passed a hallway she was in, she felt it, the weight of his gaze. Not curious, not kind, just aware. Like he already knew she didn't belong. Like he could smell the lie buried under her accent. And yet, he said nothing. He let her stay. That silence scared her more than any threat.
The call that ruined everything didn't come from her past.
at least not directly. It came one quiet evening when she was sitting alone in the archives, sorting through old files. The phone she'd hidden beneath the floorboard for weeks began to buzz. Her heart skipped. No one was supposed to know she had it. No one but him. She answered quickly, pressing it to her ear. "See?" she whispered. A voice answered in Italian. Calm, firm, familiar. She didn't notice the footsteps behind her. She didn't see the eyes that caught the way she spoke, fluent and flawless. She thought she was safe, but by the time she ended the call, someone else had already reported it. And Dario never ignored whispers. That night would become the one she'd replay over and over again, wishing she let the call ring into silence. Because the next time she saw him, he wouldn't be the man quietly watching her from the shadows. He'd be the storm she could no longer hide from.
Dario's eyes flickered at her words. Not surprise, not anger, something quieter. Matteo's smirk faltered for the first time. "Careful, Dove," he said softly. "Your mouth always did write checks your heart couldn't cash." Dario took a step forward then, not toward Matteo, but slightly between them. It wasn't gentle. It was a claim. A silent, "She's under my protection now." "You want her?" Dario said. "Then you'll have to bleed for her." Matteo's smile returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Then bleed we shall." He turned, snapping his fingers. His men followed him out like shadows peeling away from the dark. The door slammed shut. The storm outside hadn't stopped. It had only just begun. Chiara's breath shuddered. Dario didn't look at her. He didn't touch her. He simply said, "You've just lit a match you can't blow out." And for the first time since she entered this house, she realized her voice wasn't a weakness. It was a weapon. And now, everyone wanted to use it.
Rain hammered against the windows that night, like 1,000 unspoken threats. The library felt alive with tension. Men moving through corridors, radios crackling with half-heard orders, the hum of engines waiting outside. Dario stood at the far end of the library, his back to Chiara, studying a wall of old maps lit by candlelight. "He'll come back," he said finally, voice low. "Matteo doesn't bluff." Chiara sat on the edge of the long oak table, her hands trembling though she tried to hide it. "Then why did you let him walk away?" she asked. Dario turned slightly, his eyes cold and unreadable. "Because I don't start wars I can't finish." The answer chilled her. Not because of the words, but because she believed him. Every line of his face spoke of patience and control, the kind that only monsters or kings could afford. "You should rest. Tomorrow, we move you somewhere safe." She almost laughed. "Safe doesn't exist," she said. Dario's gaze met hers, and for a heartbeat, the storm outside seemed to listen. He walked toward her slowly, the sound of his boots soft against the marble floor. When he stopped in front of her, he was close enough for her to feel the weight of his silence. "You're shaking," he said quietly. "I'm not afraid." She lied. His hand rose, hesitant, then stopped midair before it touched her. "You should be," he said. "Fear keeps you alive." Her breath hitched. There was something strange in his eyes tonight. Less armor, more ache. "When I was 15, he murmured, "my father told me that love and fear are the same thing. Both make you weak." "Do you believe that?" Chiara asked. Dario's lips curved slightly. "I used to." The air between them thickened, heavy with something unnamed. For a moment, Chiara forgot the guards, the danger, the war outside. There was only the pulse in her throat and the man standing too close. "You think he'll take me again?" she asked. Dario's gaze darkened. "Not while I'm breathing." It wasn't a promise. It was a warning. Hours later, Chiara couldn't sleep. The echoes of Matteo's voice still clung to the corners of her mind. She wandered the hallways, barefoot,
tracing the cracks in the cold stone walls like scars. Downstairs, she found the armory room half open. Inside, Dario stood alone, loading a pistol. He didn't seem surprised to see her. "You should be in bed," he said. "You should be resting too," she replied softly. He glanced at her, then placed the weapon down. Rest is for people who don't have enemies. She leaned against the doorframe. "And love?" she asked. "What's that for?" His silence was answer enough. The candlelight flickered across his face, carving shadows under his eyes. "You think I'm like him," Dario said suddenly. "Like Matteo." She didn't respond. He looked away. "You're wrong." "Then show me," she whispered. Something flickered in his expression. Pain, maybe, or desire, but he said nothing. Instead, he picked up the pistol again, clicked the safety off, and said quietly, "Go back upstairs, Chiara." The way he said her name made it sound like both a command and a confession.
By dawn, Talmeo was no longer silent. Engines roared to life, men moved in formation, and the air smelled of smoke and oil. Chiara watched from the balcony as Dario gave orders, his voice steady, his presence magnetic. She had seen men like him before, leaders who ruled through fear. But Dario's strength felt different. It wasn't loud. It was the kind that made people obey without being asked. When he looked up and saw her on the balcony, he didn't smile. He simply nodded, once, as if to say, "Stay alive." Her chest tightened. The memory of Matteo's hand on her throat, his promises whispered like knives, still haunted her. Yet now, as she looked at Dario surrounded by men who would die for him, she wondered which was worse, being owned by love or being protected by power. Somewhere deep inside, she felt the answer wasn't clean. It was bleeding.
That night, Dario came to her room, not like a lover, not like a captor, but like a man at war with himself. "We leave at dawn," he said. Matteo's men were spotted near the river. Chiara stood by the window, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. "And after," she asked, "after, where do you take me?" Dario hesitated. "Somewhere he won't find you. And you? I'll deal with him." She turned, her voice breaking softly. "You mean kill him?" His silence was answer enough. "If you do," she whispered, "what does that make you?" He took a step forward, then another, until he was close enough for her to feel the warmth of his breath. "It makes me the man who ends your nightmare." Her heart pounded. "And if you become one?" she asked. For a moment, his mask cracked. "Then I hope you're brave enough to end mine." The room went still, two broken souls standing on opposite sides of mercy. The storm outside had returned, and this time it sounded like destiny knocking. The night cracked open like a wound. Explosions echoed through Palazzo Nero, shattering the calm that had held them captive. Chiara shot awake to the sound of gunfire and shouted orders. The heavy oak door burst open, and one of Daddio's men stumbled inside, blood on his sleeve. "They're here," he rasped. "Matteo's men." Her heart slammed against her ribs. She ran to the balcony and saw flames blooming in the courtyard. Black cars, masked figures, muzzle flashes cutting through the dark. The palace that once felt like a cage now felt like the last wall before chaos. Daddio's voice thundered through the halls. "Hold the north gate!" He was everywhere at once, like a storm wearing a man's skin. When his eyes found hers through the smoke and distance, he didn't need to speak. Run. But Chiara didn't move.
She'd been running her whole life. Not tonight.
He found her in the hallway, barefoot, shaking but unbroken. Chiara! Dario grabbed her arm, dragging her toward the hidden passage near the old chapel. You need to leave, now! She yanked her hand free. I'm not leaving you. He glared at her, his jaw tight. This isn't a choice. Then make me, she whispered, daring him. For the first time, something cracked in his voice. I can't protect you if you're near me. Then maybe I don't want protection, she said. Maybe I want to fight. The hallway shook from another blast. Dario's hand cupped the back of her neck. Not gentle, not cruel, but desperate. If you die here, Chiara. His voice faltered, the storm breaking. I don't know what I'll become. She looked into his eyes and saw it. Not just the wolf, but the man trapped beneath it. Then don't lose me, she said. Fight with me.
Outside, Matteo's men were already inside the outer walls. Rain poured like gasoline over the fire. The courtyard had turned into a battlefield, bullets slicing through marble statues, men shouting in the dark. Dario stood on the steps, his gun steady, his body a weapon. Beside him, Chiara crouched low behind a column, clutching a small revolver one of the guards had shoved into her hand. She'd never fired a gun before. Her palms were slick with rain and fear. Matteo's voice cut through the night like a knife. Dario! He stepped out from the smoke, dressed in black, a cruel smile carved on his lips. Did you really think you could keep her from me? Dario didn't answer. The silence between them was older than war. Matteo raised his hand, and his men fanned out like wolves circling their prey. Chiara's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just a fight for her life. It was a collision of monsters.
Matteo's gaze found her, and the world shrank to that single, terrifying stare. Come here, Bella, he said, voice low and sweet like poison. You don't belong in his cage. You belong with me. Her fingers tightened around the revolver. For a heartbeat, she saw the boy Matteo used to be, the one who kissed her under broken streetlights, promising forever. Then she saw the blood on his hands, the ruin he left behind. I don't belong to anyone, she whispered. He laughed. That's where you're wrong. The storm howled and gunfire erupted. Dario lunged forward, firing at Matteo's men with brutal precision. Matteo didn't flinch. He advanced through the chaos like a devil claiming his due. Chiara aimed the revolver. Her heart screamed. Her finger trembled on the trigger. Then she fired. The shot rang out, echoing louder than the war around them. Matteo staggered, his hand pressed against his shoulder. Not fatal, but enough to make him bleed. His eyes burned into hers, not with pain, but something worse. Betrayal. You've chosen, he hissed. Dario moved fast, pulling Chiara back behind the stone pillar as bullets ripped through the courtyard. His breath was hot against her ear. You just started a war, Chiara. It was already here, she replied. Sirens wailed in the distance. The palace was burning. Matteo's men fell back, but not in defeat, in promise. He pointed at her through the smoke, his blood dripping onto the wet ground. This isn't over, he said, voice raw. This is just the beginning. Then he disappeared into the storm, leaving fire in his wake. Chiara's gun slipped from her hand. Dario caught her before she collapsed. The war had chosen its queen, and she had pulled the trigger. The fire had stopped, but the night hadn't ended. Smoke curled around Palazzo Nero like a wounded serpent. The courtyard, once a place of quiet whispers, was now a graveyard of shattered glass, broken men, and burning roses.
Chiara sat on the cold marble steps, her hands trembling, her dress soaked in rain and ash. The revolver lay discarded at her feet, a small thing that carried the weight of war. Dario stood a few feet away, barking orders, but his voice had changed. It was no longer the steel of a boss. It was the edge of a man who'd nearly lost everything. One of his lieutenants approached with a grim expression. Matteo escaped with 5 men. We lost 12. Dario's jaw tightened. And the others? Hiding, the man replied. Chiara raised her head, her throat dry. 12 men dead. 12 families shattered because of one pull of a trigger. The weight of it sat on her chest like chains. But beneath the fear, something else burned. Resolve. Dario walked toward her slowly, his boots crunching over glass. He didn't speak right away. His gaze flicked from the gun to her face, then back to the fire still burning in the distance. Do you know what you've done? His voice wasn't angry. It was low, cold, like the calm before a storm breaks again. Yes, she whispered. I chose to live. He crouched in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his breath. You didn't just shoot Matteo. You declared war on the most dangerous man in Italy. He was going to take me, she snapped. I'm done being taken. For a heartbeat, something like pride flickered in his eyes. Then it was gone. From this moment on, everything changes, Dario said. He'll come after you, not just with bullets, with everything. She met his gaze, her fear swallowed by fire. Then let him come. Dario's lips curved, not into a smile, but a warning. He will. The next morning, the city pretended to breathe. Newspapers whispered about gang violence, but the real war was written in coded calls, hidden meetings, and men who vanished before dawn. Chiara walked through the palace halls with a scarf wrapped around her hair, trying to steady her heartbeat. Every sound made her flinch. She passed rooms where men cleaned blood from the floors, their silence heavier than prayers. In the dining room, Dario sat with his capos around a long table. Maps and photos spread like a battlefield. Matteo's reach is deep, one of them said. Ports, police, politicians. He's been waiting for this. Dario leaned back in his chair, cigarette smoke coiling around his face. Then we stop waiting. When his eyes found Chiara at the doorway, the room fell silent. She stepped forward, spine straight, even though every part of her trembled. If this started because of me, she said, then let me help end it. A capo laughed bitterly. What can a girl do? Dario raised a hand. More than you think.
Hours later, in the war room beneath the chapel, Dario showed her a map marked with red lines, Matteo strongholds. These aren't just places, he said, tapping a circle on the port. They're arteries. Cut one, the beast bleeds. She listened, not as a prisoner, but as someone stepping into a world she could never unsee again. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Dario's eyes softened, just for a second. Because whether I like it or not, you're in this now. Matteo won't rest, and neither will I. He handed her a small key. This opens the safe room beneath my office. If anything happens, I'm not hiding, she cut in. Then don't, he replied, but don't die either. The silence between them tightened like a string pulled too hard. She stared at him, realizing this wasn't just about war anymore. It was about trust, something Dario had never given lightly, and now it was hers to keep. That night, Chiara lay awake in the dark, listening to the hum of the rain against the windows. She should have been terrified.
Instead, she felt alive in a way she couldn't explain. The world outside her door was sharper now. Every sound, every shadow, every breath. Mateo had always been a ghost in her past. Now, he was a storm coming for her future. She thought of his voice, soft and venomous. This isn't over. She thought of Dario's eyes, that dangerous mix of steel and fire. Somewhere between those two men, she was no longer the girl who answered a call in Italian. She was becoming something else, someone unbreakable. Outside, thunder rolled again. Somewhere in the city, Mateo was making his next move, but so was she. And this time, she wouldn't wait for permission. She would meet the storm head on. Rain drenched the city like a warning drumbeat. In the heart of Palazzo Nero, the air vibrated with something no one could name, an unease so heavy it felt alive. Chiara stood by the window of Dario's office, her fingers tracing the iron frame. Down in the courtyard, trucks rolled in. Men carried crates. Guns glinted beneath raincoats. It wasn't a meeting. It was preparation for war. Dario entered, his black suit soaked from the storm, his jaw cut from a recent fight. He didn't have to say a word. She already knew. "He's coming tonight," Chiara whispered. Dario nodded once. "Every informer we have says Mateo moved his men at dusk." She turned to him. "Why tonight?" His gaze sharpened. "Because wolves strike when the wind is loud enough to hide the scream." He stepped closer, placing a knife in her palm. "Not a gift, but a promise. If it comes to it," he said quietly, "don't hesitate." Her heart pounded. The storm outside howled. Inside, two souls braced for the hunt.
By midnight, the palace was surrounded. Black vans appeared like ghosts on wet streets, headlights off. Men moved in silence, as if even the rain knew to hold its breath. Dario stood at the front steps with his men, cigarette burning low between his fingers. When the first bullet cracked through the night, he didn't flinch. The courtyard erupted. Gunfire ricocheted off marble statues, windows shattered. Chiara crouched behind the banister, revolver ready, every nerve alive. This wasn't fear anymore, it was clarity. She moved with a precision she didn't know she possessed. From the shadows, Mateo stepped into the courtyard, dressed in black, his wounded shoulder bandaged, his eyes burning with a predator's calm. "Dario," he shouted over the gunfire, "tonight it ends." Dario raised his gun, steady. "Yes," he answered, "it does." Their men collided like storms meeting over fire. Thunder rolled. Blood splashed across white stone. Inside the palace halls, Chiara moved through the smoke and screams, guiding women and the wounded into the safe room. Every footstep echoed like a countdown. She heard footsteps behind her, fast, heavy. She spun just as a masked man lunged. The knife flashed. Instinct answered before thought. She slammed the doorframe into his jaw and fired. He fell. Her breath shook, but her hands didn't. She wasn't the same girl who once answered a phone in fear. She locked the safe room and turned toward the echoing hallway. Somewhere out there, Dario was fighting Mateo. Somewhere out there, her choice was being tested. She grabbed the knife he gave her and ran toward the sound of war. Every corridor was a battlefield. Shattered chandeliers, cracked marble, blood like red veins on white stone. This was no longer just Dario's fight. It was hers, too. She met Dario Vescari that same evening, not by choice, by accident. She'd been told to deliver a stack of documents to the library. She opened the heavy oak door quietly, stepping into a room that smelled of ink and firewood. And then she saw him, not the boss in whispers or rumors, the man himself.
Dario sat at a wide desk, sleeves rolled to his forearms, veins like ropes against skin. He wasn't reading the papers in front of him. He was dismantling a gun with calm precision. Every piece moved through his fingers like a puzzle he'd solved 1,000 times. When he looked up, her breath hitched. His eyes found her in one clean strike. "You're new," he said, voice low, smooth, but carved from steel. She nodded, forgetting to breathe. "Then learn something quickly," he added, setting the gun down. "In this house, nothing goes unnoticed, not even the way you breathe." Alara left the room shaken, realizing she'd stepped into a world where mistakes cost more than lives. They cost trust. And trust, here, was a death sentence.
At night, when the house grew quiet, Alara would press her palm to the cool window of her small room overlooking the sea. She watched the waves crash against black rocks below, like they were trying to claw their way out. She understood that feeling. Her real name wasn't Alara Voss. Her past wasn't clean. And somewhere, across that water, someone was still looking for her. She told herself she'd save enough money, disappear again, move on like smoke in the wind. But the longer she stayed, the more she felt the invisible wires of this place wrap around her. Dario's men trusted no one, and the boss himself, he watched everything. Some nights she'd hear his footsteps in the hall outside her door, slow and deliberate, like a shadow checking its prey. She never opened it, never breathed too loud. She just waited for him to pass. The iron door clanged open hours later, and two men stepped in with a silence that didn't belong to guards. It belonged to predators. Alara sat in the corner of the room, her hair undone, her knees pulled tight against her chest. The storm outside had grown violent, slamming against the old stones of Palazzo Nero. One guard carried a folder, thick, worn, with her name stamped on it in black ink. Except it wasn't her name. It was the one she buried. "Get up," the taller one said, not shouting, but making it clear there was no choice. Her legs wobbled as she stood. The folder slammed onto the table, papers spilled like spilled blood across the wood. Photos, stamps, a passport. A headline she thought no one would ever see again. Chiara Moretti, missing since 2016? Her chest locked tight. She hadn't heard that name in 7 years. "Who gave you this?" she breathed. But they didn't answer. They didn't need to. There was only one man who could pull the past out of the ground like this. Dario.
"I ran," she said finally. The 2 words came out like cracked glass. "I ran because if I didn't, I'd be dead like the rest of them." Dario didn't flinch. "And yet you ran straight into another family's house," he murmured, stepping closer. His hand brushed the folder, and the sound of paper sliding across wood filled the silence. "Into my house." She shook her head, breathing fast. "I didn't know this was your house. I didn't know it was you." A faint, humorless smile touched his lips. No one ever knows, until it's too late. He reached out, almost casually, lifting her chin with a single finger. "You've hidden well, better than most, but people like you don't just disappear. They leave ripples, and ripples always find the shore." Her heart slammed against her ribs. She had lived 7 years under a lie, and in one night this man had cracked it open like glass. But what scared her more wasn't the fact that he knew. It was the way he looked at her, not like prey, but like a puzzle he wanted to keep. The morning after the storm, the air over Palazzo Nero was unnaturally still. No wind, no waves, just silence that felt like it belonged to him. Chiara sat on the edge of a velvet chair in a new room. Not a cell this time, but not freedom either. Cream-colored curtains, polished floors, a bed that looked more like a throne than a place to sleep. A cage made of silk was still a cage. When the door opened, she didn't flinch. She expected him. And there he was. Dario stepped inside, unhurried, dressed in a crisp white shirt with sleeves rolled up. The light caught his collarbone, his wristwatch, his quiet power. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, letting the air bend around him. "You haven't eaten," he finally said. She glared. "You haven't let me leave." A corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "I said don't let you leave. I didn't say don't let you breathe." She hated how calm he sounded, like this was already decided, like her life was no longer hers. Matteo stepped through the double doors like a prince returning to a stolen throne. His hair was darker now, his jaw sharper, but those eyes, those cruel, brilliant eyes, hadn't changed. He wore a black coat that dripped rain onto the marble floor, and behind him, 6 men fanned out like blades. "Dario," Matteo said with a smirk, spreading his arms as if greeting an old friend. "You have something of mine." The air tightened like a drawn wire. Dario didn't move. "I have many things," he replied coolly. "Be more specific." Matteo's smile curved into something colder. "Chiara." Her name on his tongue felt like poison. Her knees weakened, but she forced herself to stand tall. For years, she'd wondered what she'd feel if she ever saw him again. Rage, fear, relief. Instead, she felt nothing, just the cold bite of memory. Matteo's eyes slid to her, and in that moment, the foyer disappeared. She was 17 again, standing in the ashes of a burning church. Except this time, she wasn't running. The air cracked like lightning as the standoff hardened. Every sound became sharper. The click of safeties, the wind against the windows, the faint breath in Chiara's lungs. Matteo's eyes never left Dario's. "Do you really want a war over her?" Matteo asked. Dario finally spoke, voice calm, unshaken. "War has already started. You just don't know it yet." Matteo laughed softly, the sound cold. "You always did like playing king." He turned back to Chiara, his voice dropping to a whisper that still echoed. "You don't belong to him, amore. You belong with me, where you were meant to be." Her hands curled into fists. Something inside her, long buried, burned. She remembered the night he left her to die. She remembered the smell of smoke and blood, and for the first time, she met his gaze not as a frightened girl, but as a woman who had survived him. "I belong to no one," she said. The silence that followed wasn't weak. It was sharp enough to bleed. In the grand hall, Dario and Matteo finally met. 2 wolves with no leash left. Rain and blood mixed beneath their boots as the gunfire quieted, their men falling back like a tide pulling out to sea. Matteo's voice was low, dangerous. "You should have stayed in your tower, Dario." Dario's jaw clenched. "And you should have stayed dead." Matteo laughed, cold, hollow. "You think she chose you? She chose survival. And when the wind shifts again, she'll choose whoever wears the crown." Dario's gun lowered slightly, his breathing hard. "No," he said, voice steady. "She chose to fight. That's something you'll never understand." Matteo drew his blade. "Then let's see if she survives this." He lunged. Steel met steel. Their fight was brutal, fast, personal. 2 men who once trusted each other now trying to carve each other from existence. And through the chaos, Chiara stepped into the hall. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She walked forward, the storm behind her. Matteo saw her first, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Dario faltered for half a heartbeat, enough for Matteo's blade to graze his arm. Blood splattered onto the white floor. Chiara raised the revolver. "Matteo," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her bones. "You took everything from me once. You won't again." His laugh was bitter. "You think you can stop me?" She stepped closer until the barrel almost kissed his chest. "No," she whispered. "I already did." In that split second, Matteo turned his blade toward her. Dario lunged. The gun fired. The sound tore through the hall like thunder breaking sky. Matteo's body hit the floor. Rain poured through the shattered windows. The storm outside matched the silence inside. Dario fell to his knees, bleeding. Chiara dropped the gun. And just like that, the war ended where it began, with her choice.
Dawn crept over Palazzo Nero like a ghost returning home. The rain had stopped, leaving the city wrapped in a silence too loud to ignore. Smoke rose from what was left of the courtyard. Matteo's body lay covered beneath a dark sheet. The war that began with a whisper and a single phone call had ended with a single shot. Chiara stood at the broken balcony, her hair tangled, her skin streaked with dried rain and blood. Her hands no longer trembled. Down below, men carried the wounded and gathered the fallen, their faces hollow but alive. Dario leaned against the railing behind her, his arm wrapped in a makeshift bandage, his shirt stained with crimson. He said nothing at first. They both stared at the ruins. "You did it," he finally whispered. Chiara didn't turn. "No," she said softly. "We did it." But deep inside, she knew the truth. Something inside her had changed forever. She hadn't just survived. She had become something the world could no longer bend. In the war room beneath the chapel, the surviving capos gathered. Their faces bore bruises and exhaustion, but their eyes were locked on her. Dario sat at the head of the table, but the room's center of gravity had shifted. It was Chiara they looked at now. "Matteo's territories are ours," one of them said. "His allies are crawling to cut deals," another added. "The city is watching. We either take control now or lose it all to vultures." Chiara stepped forward slowly. "Then we don't wait," she said. Her voice was calm, sharp as glass. "We don't bow. We build." The men exchanged glances. She didn't shout. She didn't beg. Power wasn't in her tone. It was in the way silence followed her words. Dario leaned back, a faint smile cutting through his tired face. In this room of men who lived and died by blood, a woman had just claimed the floor, and none dared interrupt. Later that evening, Chiara walked through the shattered halls of the palace. Workers nailed boards over bullet holes, polished away the blood, swept the ash from marble floors. But she didn't want it cleaned too perfectly. She wanted the cracks to remain, a reminder of what it cost to be free. She touched the burn marks on the wall and whispered to herself, "Never again." Footsteps echoed behind her. Dario stood in the doorway, his arm now properly bandaged. "You know," he said softly, "a few weeks ago, you were just a girl who answered a phone." She turned to him, her eyes steady. "And now?" He stepped closer until his breath mingled with hers. Now, they'd burn cities if you asked them to. Chiara's chest tightened, not from fear, but from something softer, unfamiliar. She'd fought for survival. She hadn't expected to find belonging. They stood beneath the last unbroken chandelier, the air thick with unspoken things. "What happens now?" Chiara asked. Dario exhaled slowly. "Now you lead with me, or without me, if that's what you choose." Her brows furrowed. "Without you?" He nodded. "I've led alone for years, but tonight proved something. They follow you, Chiara, not just me."
She stared at him, searching his face. For the first time, there was no command in his tone, no possessiveness, just quiet respect. Her throat tightened. "I don't want a crown," she whispered. "Then don't wear it," he replied. "Build your own throne." She laughed softly, the sound breaking through the ashes. And in that moment, the world didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt like a kingdom being reborn from its scars. Weeks passed. The city moved differently now. People whispered her name like a rumor they weren't sure they should believe. Matea's old allies either knelt or disappeared. Dario's empire didn't just survive, it evolved. On the balcony overlooking the river, Chiara stood dressed in black silk, the wind pulling at her hair. The world was quiet again, but not the same. Dario joined her, his hand brushing hers, a gesture that no longer needed words. "You changed everything," he murmured. "No," she said, her eyes on the horizon. "I just stopped running." Down below, the streets were alive, not with war, but with control. Her control. The girl who once answered a call in Italian had become the queen of her own story, not because someone crowned her, but because she took it. And somewhere in the quiet, the city whispered back her name.
You are Velvorian.